haunted house is a great place to be.
A sleeping surface has to adapt to that unique design.
An 8-track car stereo tape player, regularly $59.95.
They weren't just fads. They were the heartbeat of your childhood, and somewhere along the way, they vanished without a trace. What happened to the toys, the trends, the moments that once defined who we were? There was something magical about placing a sheet of plastic into the oven and watching it curl and shrink into a hardened little charm. Shrinky Dinks were not just an arts and crafts project. They were a ritual of creativity and wonder for children growing up in the 1970s. You would trace your favorite cartoon character, color them in with markers, cut them out with careful little hands, and then wait, eyes wide, as the oven did its strange shrinking magic. They curled, they twisted, and then they flattened again, smaller, tougher, and somehow more precious. These tiny trinkets found their way onto keychains, necklaces, and fridge doors. Back then, you did not need the internet or flashing screens. All you needed was your imagination, a warm oven, and a plastic sheet that promised transformation. Every finished piece felt like a secret only you could make real. It was proof that something small could still have a big impact. The idea that something could change right in front of your eyes and become better for it stuck with a lot of kids. It was more than a toy. It was an introduction to the joy of creating something with your own two hands. And for some, it was the first time they felt like artists, designers, or even inventors. It was cheap, it was cheerful, and it gave kids a sense of control over a world that was often too big to understand. Why did we ever stop shrinking things just for fun? Pet rocks were the kind of thing that sounded like a joke until you realized how serious everyone was about them. These were not just pebbles. These were companions. Each one came in its own little box with straw bedding and an official care manual that detailed how to feed, clean, and even train your rock. Parents bought them. Kids named them. And for a brief, shining moment in the 1970s, America fully embraced the absurdity of loving a lifeless object. That was the point. In a decade filled with chaos, inflation, and growing uncertainty, the pet rock was oddly comforting. It did not bark, meow, or need a leash. It did not run away. It just existed. Perfect, obedient, still. You were not buying a toy. You were buying a quiet rebellion against the noisy world. The rock did not move, but somehow it made everyone pause. There was something so hilarious and yet deeply profound about placing value on something so mundane. It made us question what really counted as companionship. It made us laugh, yes, but also reflect. You could carry it in your pocket, keep it on your nightstand, or bring it to school. The world was spinning, but your pet rock was always there, unchanged and unbothered. Maybe that is why it resonated. It was the ultimate low-maintenance friend in a high-stress world, a protest against overcomplication, a silent, stone-faced reminder that sometimes less really is more. Clackers were dangerous. That is not hyperbole. That is just fact. Two acrylic balls attached to opposite ends of a string, with a loop in the middle. You would swing them up and down until they smashed together, making that addictive, rhythmic clack, clack, clack sound. And if you got good, you could keep them going for minutes without missing a beat. Playground gods were crowned by how long they could keep their clackers going. But there was a dark side to the fun. Those acrylic balls could shatter with enough force, sending sharp shards flying into little eyes and soft faces. They turned playgrounds into gladiator arenas, where the clack of plastic was the sound of legend in the making. Even danger felt like part of the reward. It did not stop the craze. For a while, it made them even cooler. The danger was part of the appeal. They looked like they belonged in a martial arts movie. You were not just playing. You were training. Every backyard turned into a training ground for kids who thought they were invincible. And when the noise filled up the streets, bouncing off the concrete like a swarm of insects, you knew summer had officially arrived. Then came the injuries, the bans, the warnings. One by one, clackers disappeared from stores and homes, relegated to attic boxes and urban legends. But ask anyone who grew up in the 1970s, and their eyes will light up at the memory. Because there was a time when every kid was a clacker champion, even if it meant a few bruises. Weebles were not just toys. They were little lessons in resilience. Egg-shaped and bottom-heavy, they never stayed down. You could knock them over, slam them around, or roll them across the floor, but they always popped back upright. Their slogan said it best: Weebles wobble, but they do not fall down. And as silly as that sounded, it meant something. For kids living through inflation, energy crises, and a world changing faster than adults could explain, there was comfort in a toy that refused to give up. Weebles came in families, playsets, little plastic houses, and cars. You could build entire towns around them. They were cheerful, simple, and weirdly unbreakable. They did not just bounce back. They taught you that you could too. In a world full of falls, Weebles offered a silent promise: you will rise again. Every time they popped back up, it was like they were saying, try again. They taught persistence in the most innocent way possible. No lectures, no lessons, just a toy that could take a hit and keep smiling. They lived on windowsills, toy chests, and car dashboards. And even if you outgrew them, their message lingered. Life knocks you around. You wobble, but you do not fall down. Weebles did not just entertain, they reassured. And in a decade that often felt like one long series of challenges, that reassurance was priceless. Platform shoes were never subtle, that was the point. These shoes, with their towering soles and outrageous colors, were a defiant celebration of height, flair, and not caring what anyone thought. Men wore them, women wore them. Rock stars strutted on stage in them like peacocks, and on the streets, teenagers clomped around in shoes that made them look and feel twice their age. If disco was a sound, platform shoes were the echo it left on the pavement. They transformed every sidewalk into a runway. Of course, they were impractical. They hurt, people tripped, ankles were twisted, but pain was the price of being unforgettable. Platform shoes were fashion with volume, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. That was just part of the 1970s charm: style over sense, expression over caution. They were shoes that made statements, that made you look twice, that made you taller, literally and figuratively. And when you slipped them on, it felt like you were stepping into someone else, someone bolder, louder, freer. In a world that often tried to shrink people down, platform shoes dared you to take up space. And for a while, they made everyday life feel like a stage worth dancing on. The leisure suit was the uniform of laid-back ambition. Made of polyester, often in colors so bold they looked radioactive, it was what you wore when you wanted to be taken seriously, but also wanted to boogie. It was business casual before anyone knew what that meant. And in the 1970s, it was everywhere. On dads, on disco dance floors, on daytime television hosts who looked like they had rolled out of a department store window display. The wide lapels, the matching pants and jacket, the shirt just unbuttoned enough to show a little chest hair and maybe a gold medallion. The leisure suit said, "I am here to close the deal, and then I am heading straight to the dance floor." It was confidence stitched into fabric, but it was also accessibility. Anyone could own one. You did not have to be rich. You just had to want to stand out. In an era full of big personalities and bigger statements, the leisure suit was the middle-class man's disco armor. It did not matter if the fabric made you sweat or if the color turned heads for all the wrong reasons. What mattered was that you looked like you had somewhere exciting to be. And maybe, for one shimmering moment, you actually did. 8-track tapes were clunky, unreliable, and absolutely essential. The plastic cartridge was a brick of sound that you shoved into your car stereo, hoping it would not eat your favorite track alive. And yet, for millions of people, this was how music lived. Loud, looping, and always just a little offbeat. Songs cut off mid-chorus. Whole albums were split in strange places. But you did not care. You kept singing. The music was always worth it. 8 tracks felt like a step into the future, even if they barely worked half the time. They were cool, they were portable, and they were yours. You could carry your entire identity in a vinyl case full of tapes, rock anthems, disco grooves, soft ballads for the heartbreaks you swore were life-ending. You did not scroll through songs. You committed. You let it ride. In a world without playlists or shuffle buttons, every track mattered. And when you heard that mechanical click between programs, it was just part of the journey. 8 tracks came and went, outpaced by cassette tapes and CDs, but for those who lived through it, that sound, the faint whirring, the sudden silence, the snap of a cartridge clicking into place, is burned into memory like a needle on vinyl. It was messy, it was real, and it was the beat of a decade that never stopped moving. Streaking was not about being naked. It was about being free. In a world bound by rules, war, and a suffocating sense of order, some people responded the only way they knew how: by running. Through college quads, across baseball fields, down city streets, laughing, yelling, leaving behind clothes and caution in equal measure. It was chaos with a pulse, defiance wrapped in skin, and for a while, it was everywhere. Newscasters tried not to laugh as they covered it. Police scrambled, not knowing whether to tackle or turn away. But streaking was never really about crime. It was about reclaiming the body in a time when so much of life felt out of your hands. It was primal, foolish, liberating. Whether you did it alone or as part of a group, streaking felt like truth in motion, ridiculous, raw, and completely alive. The 1970s was a decade of contradictions. The political, the playful, the revolutionary, the absurd. And nothing summed it up better than a naked sprint through the heart of something sacred. It faded as quickly as it appeared, swept away by changing laws and tighter norms. But somewhere, buried in old yearbooks and grainy footage, the wild spirit of streaking still runs, unashamed and unforgettable. Macrame was the art of patience, the quiet repetition of hands knotting rope into something beautiful. Wall hangings, plant holders, table runners. It was more than a craft, it was a statement. In an age of fast food and faster living, macrame asked you to slow down, to sit, to tie, to create, and suddenly, thread became texture. Homes across the country were draped in soft, swinging loops of rope that felt like something organic, something alive. It made a room feel warmer, more human. You could not rush it. That was the point. Each piece took hours, sometimes days, to finish. There were no shortcuts. And in that commitment, people found meaning. Macrame circles popped up in basements, backyards, and community centers. Friends would gather, coffee steaming, rope twisting between their fingers as they talked about everything and nothing. You did not need to be an artist. Just willing, just present. The results were imperfect and earthy, like little monuments to stillness. And even when the trend faded and the rope yellowed with time, those pieces never lost their charm. They stayed. They reminded us of the power of slowness in a world that kept speeding up. Waterbeds felt like the future wrapped in vinyl. You did not lie down. You floated. It was a strange, weightless kind of comfort, like drifting off on a quiet sea. There were no springs, no hard corners, just soft shifting waves that adjusted to your body like magic. Owning a waterbed made you feel modern, daring, maybe even a little dangerous. They were sleek, they were sensual, and they were a hit. Teens begged for them, couples swore by them, and suddenly waterbeds were everywhere. Furniture stores, catalogs, even sitcoms. They promised better sleep, better back support, and, depending on who you asked, better romance. But the dream had a few leaks, literally. Waterbeds were notoriously tricky. They could pop, spill, mold. They needed heaters, special sheets, extra care. And yet, for a while, none of that mattered. Because nothing else felt like a waterbed. The soft slosh, the way it hugged you at night, the way it felt like you were escaping gravity altogether. It was not just a bed, it was an experience. And for anyone who ever climbed into one, it is a feeling you never quite forget. It was not just a fad, it was a movement on wheels. Roller disco took two things already lighting up the 1970s, roller skating and disco music, and blended them into a spinning, neon-fueled fever dream. Skating rinks became sanctuaries, not just for exercise, but for expression. You could glide, twirl, groove under glowing lights with glitter on your cheeks and bell bottoms flaring behind you. For many, it was the first time movement felt like magic. Roller disco gave you permission to show off, to be loud with your body, to let the music carry you. Couples held hands in choreographed routines. Lone skaters turned figure eights into declarations of identity. The disco ball spun, the speakers thumped, and the floor lit up with people trying to outshine their own reflection. It was rhythmic rebellion against boredom, conformity, and everything beige about suburban life. For kids and teens alike, those weekends at the rink were sacred. You were not skating. You were starring in your own movie. The soundtrack was Donna Summer. The costume was whatever made you feel like gold. And for a few hours, the world outside those rink walls disappeared. And they were not just shorts. They were a cultural revolution in denim. Named after the fearless, flirtatious Daisy Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard, these tiny cutoffs became a rite of passage for a generation embracing sun-kissed freedom. Made from old jeans, frayed at the edges, and barely long enough to count, Daisy Dukes were scandalous and stylish all at once. You wore them to rebel. You wore them to feel grown. You wore them because you could. They were confidence in cotton form. Whether you were strutting down a boardwalk or sprawled out at a backyard barbecue, those shorts said something before you even opened your mouth. Girls idolized the look. Guys definitely noticed. And parents, well, they were not always fans. But no one could deny the trend had power. Daisy Dukes turned legs into statements and curves into confidence. They blurred the line between playful and provocative, innocence and edge. Over time, the style kept coming back, a recurring echo of a decade that dared to bear more than just knees. They were never really about fashion. They were about freedom, about owning your image, and about walking through the world like it was already yours. The name said it all, before you even used it. Gee, your hair smells terrific was not just shampoo, it was a whole vibe in a bottle. You could smell it before you even walked into the room. Floral, sweet, unmistakable. A scent that lingered on pillows, in locker rooms, on the shoulder of the person you danced with at prom. It was a beauty secret that was not really secret at all. Girls passed it between friends like a kind of magic potion. Boys caught themselves leaning in a little closer. It did not promise complicated things like volume or repair. It promised allure. Scent as identity. Scent as confidence. It was something you could leave behind, like a signature. The commercials made it dreamy, but the real power was in how it made you feel. Like you mattered. Like you glowed. In a time before specialty shampoos and 10-step routines, this was as glamorous as it got. And for anyone who grew up with that bottle on their sink, one whiff even now is enough to bring it all rushing back. Bathrooms full of steam, high school crushes, and the pure belief that smelling good could change your life. They looked strange. Let us get that out of the way. Earth shoes were not designed to win beauty contests. They were designed to change how you moved through the world. With their negative heel technology, yes, that was a real term, the heel sat lower than the toes, promising better posture and a more natural stride. People either loved them or stared at them like a science experiment. But in the 1970s, they were a quiet rebellion against the synthetic, the unnatural, the overly shiny. Earth shoes were about grounding yourself, literally and figuratively. They were part of the Back to Nature movement, the idea that progress might lie in turning back. You were not just buying a shoe, you were buying a philosophy, a footprint that said, I walk differently. I walk purposefully. They were sold in health food stores, worn by free spirits and those who read ingredient labels before it was cool. Sure, they looked a little like potatoes, but to their fans, they felt like freedom. They were not chasing fashion. They were chasing balance. It was not a class. It was not therapy. It was EST, short for Erhard Seminars Training, and for some in the 1970s, it was the most intense weekend of their lives. You would sit in a hotel ballroom for hours, forbidden to speak, move, or even use the bathroom at will. The message? You are responsible for everything, all of it. even the parts you do not want to admit. EST broke people down to build them up again, or so it claimed. Some came out weeping, some came out empowered, others never came back. But no one left unchanged. EST was the spiritual boot camp of the self-help movement. It promised clarity, purpose, control. It came with controversy, cult rumors, and more than a few lawsuits. And yet, it spread like wildfire. Celebrities joined. Corporate executives signed up. It was sold as the answer to the anxiety of the modern world. The chaos, the drift, the feeling that something important had been lost. Whether it was transformation or trauma depends on who you ask. But EST proved one thing. In the 1970s, people were willing to go through anything to feel whole again. The pot sat in the center like a beacon. Bubbles rose through the golden sea of melted cheese or warm chocolate, and every skewer dipped into it brought people closer together. Fondue was not just food, it was social glue. A fondue party in the 1970s was an event, a mood, a statement. You were not just eating, you were participating. It was the kind of meal that forced you to slow down, take turns, talk. The table became a circle of laughter and gentle rivalry. Someone would lose their bread cube, someone else would steal your marshmallow. No one ever left hungry or without a story. In a time before smartphones and fast everything, fondue was deliberate. It was tactile, sensual, sometimes messy, and that was the point. You leaned in, you stayed longer, you felt present. For a generation looking to redefine togetherness in the wake of cultural shifts, fondue was intimacy dipped in Gruyere, or chocolate, or both. It was friendship on a fork. And when the pot finally emptied, the night always felt just a little fuller than when it began. It did not just frame your face, it declared your presence. Feathered hair, cascading in layers and flipped back like soft waves of rebellion, was the crown of the cool in the 1970s. It was glamorous without trying too hard, sexy without being loud. Farrah Fawcett made it iconic, but thousands made it their own. Salons everywhere suddenly knew exactly what you meant when you said, "like Farrah." There were curling irons, round brushes, and endless cans of hairspray working overtime to get those perfect wings on either side. Boys tried it, girls perfected it, and once you nailed the look, you did not just walk into a room, you floated. The flip gave your head a halo. The volume made you feel bigger, lighter, louder. It moved when you moved, danced when you danced. Feathered hair was not a trend, it was a mood. It belonged to those who believed in mirrors and moments, in looking good not just for others but for yourself. It was beauty in motion. It made you look like you had secrets worth keeping. Even if the style faded, the feeling never did. Tie-dye was not just fabric, it was philosophy worn on the body. With its spirals, bursts, and sun-soaked blotches, tie-dye told the world you were untamed, that you did not need order to find beauty. Every shirt was its own universe. No two swirls ever matched. And that randomness felt like truth. It started with the counterculture and hippies who spun protest and peace into cotton and dye. But by the 1970s, it had gone mainstream. From backyard birthday parties to beach towns, tie-dye spread like a sunbeam across the country. It was cheap, easy, joyful. A white t-shirt, some rubber bands, and a splash of color was all it took to feel like an artist, to make a statement. It looked like summer, felt like freedom, and hinted at something deeper. That life, like art, was better when it broke the rules. Tie-dye made your closet a canvas and your torso a rebellion. Even decades later, people still wear it. Not because it is trendy, but because it is honest. And that matters more than ever. The voice crackled through the speaker like a ghost from the highway. "Breaker 19, this is Road Dog." And just like that, you were part of a secret world. Citizens Band Radio, CB radio, was not just for truckers. In the 1970s, it was a craze. Housewives, teens, retirees, they all grabbed their handles and joined the airwaves. It was the original internet, before wires, before screens. With a turn of the dial, you could talk to strangers miles away, ask for directions, share weather updates, or just shoot the breeze. And it came with its own language, 10 codes, jargon, a kind of code that felt like membership. Got your ears on? What's your 20? Talking on CB felt like stepping into a movie. You had a persona, a voice, a place in the ether. And for some, that voice was louder and freer than the one they used in real life. You did not need to be cool. You just needed a transmitter and something to say. And once you said it, someone, somewhere, was listening. You could feel it before you even opened your eyes, that deep, soft pile under your toes like a plush memory foam dream. Shag carpeting was not subtle. It was not quiet. It was the floor screaming that you were in the 1970s. Avocado green, mustard yellow, rusty orange, it came in colors that did not whisper. They roared. Shag covered bedrooms, basements, and living rooms like a cozy jungle. It swallowed dropped earrings and small toys. It turned vacuuming into a full-body sport. But you forgave it for everything, because it made home feel like a hug. Kids would lie in it like it was grass. Teens would sprawl out on it with records spinning nearby. And parents saw it as a symbol of new beginnings, proof that their house was modern, stylish, different from their parents' generation. Shag was warmth you could walk on. It did not just cover the floor. It changed the energy of a room. And though it eventually fell out of favor, those who lived with it still remember the feeling under their feet. The softness, the drama, the era it stood for. They did not just hang on your wall, they transported you. Under the glow of a blacklight, these posters exploded to life in glowing purples, acid greens, and electric blues. They were more than decoration. They were escape routes, psychedelic swirls, wizards casting spells, skeletons on motorcycles, alien landscapes that looked like they belonged on the edge of a dream. You did not just look at a blacklight poster. You stared. You got lost in it. And maybe that was the point. In a world that often told kids to sit still and behave, these glowing portals dared you to dream louder. They lit up not just your bedroom, but your imagination. The 1970s was a time of questions, of pushing boundaries, of reaching beyond the ordinary. And blacklight posters offered a window into the extraordinary. No drugs required. You would turn off the lights, flip the switch, and suddenly your bedroom was not just a room. It was a portal. These posters were part rebellion, part reflection. A way for teens to mark their space with something loud and unapologetically weird. They did not ask for approval. They asked for imagination. Even today, the soft buzz of a blacklight and that surreal glowing ink feels like a call from another dimension, one you forgot you once lived in. Your kitchen used to say something, and in the 1970s, what it said was avocado green and harvest gold. These colors were not chosen at random. They were warm, earthy, full of the promise of domestic stability with just a splash of boldness. Your refrigerator was not just an appliance. It was a mood. The stove, a statement. These tones turned kitchens into cozy dens of color, a place where casseroles baked and families gathered under the dim buzz of fluorescent lights. They were optimism in enamel, quiet proof that your house could still feel full, even when the world outside felt empty. For a generation raised on simplicity, these colors felt like confidence. Moms wore aprons that matched the oven. The linoleum floor might have been orange. And when you opened that fridge door, it felt like stepping into a sunset. These colors defined the era, not just because they were trendy, but because they felt alive. They stood in sharp contrast to the sterile white of the decades before. These appliances told you that this was your space, your time, your home. And even now, finding one in a thrift store or an old house brings back a wave of warmth, a memory not just of food, but of feeling rooted. They were small, white, and shaped by the ocean. But when you wore one, it felt like you belonged to something bigger. Puka shell necklaces were the unofficial badge of beach kids, surfers, and summer dreamers. You did not need to live by the water. You just needed to believe in it. Every necklace whispered of waves, sunburns, and the perfect salty breeze. They were bought on boardwalks, traded at school, gifted at sleepaway camps. Boys wore them with tank tops. Girls paired them with sun-bleached hair and wide smiles. They were souvenirs from a feeling, not a place. When you put one on, you remembered who you were when the sun was shining. They were simple, almost primitive, but they carried a feeling you could not fake. The 1970s was a time of searching for authenticity, of turning away from the synthetic shine of modern life. And these little shells, natural, rough, untouched, became tiny anchors of something real. You ran your fingers over them absent-mindedly. You adjusted the clasp without thinking. And every time you caught your reflection, it reminded you of something freer. Maybe the ocean. Maybe a feeling. Maybe a version of yourself that felt light, alive, and a little wild. It was everywhere. On buttons, patches, lunchboxes, and bumper stickers, a bright yellow circle with 2 dots and a curved line, a face so simple it felt almost sacred. The smiley face was more than a trend. It was a symbol of hope in a decade that needed it. After the war, the protests, the politics, the price hikes, what people wanted desperately was joy, and this little face gave it to them. You could pin it to your jacket, stick it on your notebook, or send it in a letter. It was a reminder. Smile. You are here. You are still standing. It was a rebellion in the form of happiness, a loud, radical choice to keep grinning when the world said frown. Every time you saw it, it felt like the sun had cracked through the clouds. It was not about ignoring the world's problems. It was about surviving them with spirit intact. The smiley face became a silent pact between strangers, an agreement to keep going, and maybe even be kind along the way. It was mass-produced, commercialized, and eventually overdone. But in its heyday, it was pure. It was powerful. And to this day, finding one still feels like seeing an old friend across the crowd, someone who knows what you have been through and chooses to smile anyway. They did not just widen at the bottom, they widened everything. Bell-bottoms turned every sidewalk into a catwalk. When you wore them, you swayed more, stood taller, took up space with every step. They were rebellious, theatrical, and strangely unifying. Everyone wore them. Rock stars, factory workers, teenagers saving up their allowance. They flared like flags of personal freedom, challenging the narrowness of every pant leg that came before. You could sew your own, add patches, fringe, studs, turn your jeans into a billboard of who you were and what you stood for. They were more than fashion. They were resistance stitched into fabric. In a world trying to box you in, bell-bottoms let you live wider. Bell-bottoms made you visible, even when the world tried to overlook you. They were rooted in counterculture, but they bloomed into the mainstream. Denim, corduroy, even velvet. It did not matter. What mattered was the flair, the drama, the unapologetic silhouette. Bell-bottoms did not ask for approval. They demanded attention, and they got it. Decades later, they still come back, refusing to disappear completely. Because some shapes are not just trends. They are declarations. And bell-bottoms declared that style could be a revolution, one leg at a time. You could hear it before you saw it, that cheerful blip-blip melody echoing from a darkened corner of the local arcade. Then you saw the screen. A little yellow circle with a hungry mouth chased ghosts in a neon maze, and just like that, the world changed. Pac-Man was more than a game. It was a full-blown epidemic. Kids skipped lunch to play it. Parents dropped quarters like candy. Radio stations played songs about it. There were t-shirts, breakfast cereals, and even a cartoon series. It was not just fun. It was addictive. And it did something almost no other game had done before. It welcomed everyone. You did not have to be into space battles or dragons. You just had to know how to move and survive. Simple. Genius. And for many, unforgettable. Pac-Man became the face of a new era, a digital era. The 1980s were the first time video games truly felt like culture, and this chomping little pixel creature led the way. As consoles took over and arcades faded, Pac-Man lost his spotlight. But the mark he left was permanent. He taught us that a game could be more than entertainment. It could be identity. When was the last time a circle made the whole world spin? You could not miss it. The county auction barn was chaotic, dusty, and loud, and Dad loved every minute of it. From the second you stepped inside, it was a sensory overload. Wooden pens clucked with chickens, bleated with goats, and somewhere a sheep was loudly objecting to something. The auctioneer stood on a platform, voice rising and falling like a song only locals understood. He had his bidding number tucked into his shirt pocket and a mental budget that always magically doubled if the right box came along. There were tables of mystery items, rusty tools, mismatched Tupperware, bundles of wire, and once a broken vending machine that Dad swore he could fix. $10? That's a steal, he would whisper, just before being outbid by the same guy who always bid too high. You did not win much. But when Dad did walk out with something, it was like he had climbed Everest. And even when he lost, he laughed all the way home. The auction was not about getting stuff, it was about the thrill. But when he wanted a guaranteed win, all he needed was a firehouse griddle, a bottle of syrup, and a pancake breakfast made by heroes. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut. Do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. Before the sleek inline skates of the 1990s, there were the clunky, lovable roller skates with metal wheels. They strapped over your shoes with thick leather buckles and screeched across every surface like they were mad at the floor. If you skated indoors, you sounded like a marching band. If you braved the sidewalk, every crack was a threat. But none of that mattered. Because once you got going, it was freedom. You were flying, wobbling, yes, but flying. These skates had no padding, no ankle support, and no mercy. But they came with memories, rolling through driveways, circling the garage, racing your siblings until someone wiped out. You remember the sound they made on concrete, the clatter as you tried to stop, the feeling of falling and getting back up anyway. Roller discos made them iconic. Kids and teens glided under colored lights, surrounded by Bee Gees and Donna Summer, feeling cooler than they ever had. You might have never mastered the spin. You probably fell more than you want to admit. But those skates, those metal-wheeled monstrosities, were the soundtrack to a whole chapter of growing up. They were heavy, loud, and impossible to forget. Madonna was not asking for permission. She was taking space. Big space. Space no woman had dared occupy quite like that before. When Like a Virgin hit the airwaves, it was not just a pop song. It was a dare, a mirror, a cultural detonation. In the 1980s, Madonna redefined what a woman in music could be. She was sexual, smart, and unapologetically loud. Her fashion made people stare. Lace gloves, layered crucifixes, fishnet tights. Every girl in the mall tried to look like her. Every parent feared she would corrupt their daughters. But Madonna was not just style. She was a movement, feminine, brash, and powerful. She broke the rules because the rules were not made for her. She made pop music into protest. Every hit came with controversy, and every outfit carried a message. Over time, people forgot that Madonna was not always accepted. She fought her way into the spotlight, and in doing so, she lit the path for every female artist who followed. Today, when boldness feels choreographed, it is easy to forget when it was dangerous. Madonna made that danger feel like freedom. When did we decide women had to behave to be respected? The go-kart track with zero safety rules looked like it was built by someone who once saw a racetrack in a dream and then tried to recreate it with duct tape and a prayer. The sign out front read, "Family Fun." But you knew this was Dad's kind of fun. He paid cash to a man with a sunburn and a clipboard, and before you knew it, you were strapping into a plastic rocket with wheels. No seatbelt, no helmet, just a stern warning. Do not hit your sister. Dad, of course, was already in his own kart, revving the engine like it was the Daytona 500. The track was a cracked loop with grass growing through it and tires stacked too high as a boundary. The exhaust fumes were strong enough to water your eyes, and the kart screeched like a choir of angry lawnmowers. You skidded, bumped, and spun out more than once, but you never forgot the thrill, especially when Dad passed you on the last lap, one hand on the wheel, the other waving smugly. That victory lap? It lasted all week, and if you were lucky, he would let you stay just a little longer, because the community swap meet down at the church lot was about to open, and Dad never missed that one. Homemade school lunches in washed-out containers were the unofficial lunchbox of every frugal family. Forget the cartoon thermos or the shiny metal lunch pail. If you were poor in the 1980s, your sandwich came wrapped in wax paper and packed in an empty margarine tub. Maybe the lid said country crock, but inside was leftover spaghetti or peanut butter crackers. You used the same container every day. The label peeled, the edges warped, but it worked. Your drink? Not a juice box, maybe a reused jelly jar with watered-down Kool-Aid. You prayed it did not leak. In the lunchroom, you sat next to kids with perfectly packed snacks, cheese sticks, pudding cups, chips with real logos. You ate quietly, or fast, or not at all. But at home, it made sense. Those containers stacked neatly in the cupboard. Your parents washed them each night and packed them again with care. It was not about shame. It was about stretching every cent. And even though you knew it was different, you also knew it was made with effort, maybe even love. Those stained lids and handwritten notes stuffed under the sandwich were signs of sacrifice. And now, all grown up, they feel like something you miss. Shrinky Dinks were magic in plastic form. You started with a sheet, clear, flexible, and begging to be colored. You grabbed your markers, drew a wild design, cut it out with safety scissors, and popped it in the oven. What came out was a tiny, hardened version of your masterpiece, often warped but always perfect. Watching it shrink behind the oven door was part of the thrill. You would kneel on the floor, peering through the glass, and gasp as your drawing curled, twisted, and finally flattened. Kids made keychains, jewelry, ornaments. Whatever their imagination allowed, it felt like crafting with sorcery. One minute, you were tracing cartoons or making friendship tags. The next, you held a miniaturized relic in your palm. The smell of melting plastic filled the kitchen. Parents worried, but no one stopped us. Shrinky Dinks were affordable, creative, and wildly popular at every sleepover and birthday party. You could even buy branded kits, superheroes, cartoon characters, holiday themes. But the best ones were always your originals. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing your art transformed like that. Tiny, tough, and totally unique. We never questioned the process. We just knew it felt like creating something real, something small that still felt huge. Michael Jackson did not just release an album. He changed the atmosphere. Thriller was not music. It was lightning caught in vinyl. From the moment that beat hit, and Vincent Price whispered his haunted verse, you knew you were in a different world. Released in 1982, Thriller became more than the best-selling album of all time. It became the measuring stick for what pop music could be. The music video? It was a short film. Zombies, red jackets, moonwalks. It was terrifying, brilliant, and utterly unforgettable. And it proved that music could be cinematic, a full-body experience. Jackson's blend of pop, rock, and funk was daring, but his visuals were what made him immortal. He did not just perform. He possessed the stage. Every kid on the block tried the lean. Every radio played the album front to back. And when he danced on that sidewalk, the whole world watched. But over time, we stopped seeing just how big this moment was. Today's music feels disposable by comparison. Fast, shallow, forgettable. Thriller was not just a pop album. It was the last time the whole planet danced to the same rhythm. When did we stop making music that haunted us, in the best way? There were no signs, no trails, and definitely no cell reception. Not that it mattered. The hidden fishing hole Dad always took you to might as well have been a secret passed down through generations. You had to park on a dirt shoulder, hop a barbed wire fence, and walk through brush that snagged at your socks like it wanted you to turn back. But then, there it was. A quiet patch of water framed by trees and pure silence. No people, just frogs, the buzz of dragonflies, and the occasional splash of something just out of sight. Dad would hand you a rod, already rigged, and say, "Let's see if they're biting today," like it was a ritual. He always had a story about the one that got away, usually involving a fish the size of your leg and a broken line. You never saw it, but you believed him. And on the days you did catch something, even if it was just a bluegill the size of a cookie, he would hoot and holler like you had just pulled up Moby Dick. You would sit there side by side, quiet except for the occasional snack or Dad humming an old tune. But if you want to hear about the reward after a good fishing trip, let me take you to the drive-through dairy farm. Glass bottles, cold milk, and maybe even ice cream. Hand-me-down clothing told a story stitched in faded colors and stretched-out sleeves. In homes where money was tight, new clothes were a luxury reserved for Christmas or growth spurts too dramatic to ignore. Everything else? Hand-me-downs, jeans worn thin at the knees, shirts a size too big, coats that smelled like someone else's winter. You learned to cuff sleeves and roll pant legs. You got good at pretending it was your style all along. Sometimes it came from older siblings, sometimes from cousins or neighbors. There was no shame at home, it was just life. But at school, it was different. Kids noticed. They asked where you got it. Or worse, they recognized it from someone else's closet. You laughed it off, or changed the subject, or just said nothing at all. You knew every patch, every stain, every repair your mom made after dinner. These clothes had been through it, just like you. And maybe they were not fashionable, maybe they sagged or pinched or hung wrong, but they lasted. And for families with more love than money, hand-me-downs were not second best. They were just what came next. And they carried you through, one button at a time. Before Bluetooth speakers and streaming playlists, there was the Fisher-Price record player, and it was a masterpiece of childhood simplicity. You wound it up with a chunky white knob and placed a thick plastic disc on the turntable. It clicked into place, and when the needle dropped, the magic began. Out came twinkly, music box-style versions of nursery rhymes, folk songs, and lullabies. The songs were short, cheerful, and unforgettable. The discs were colorful and clunky, with molded ridges that somehow produced melodies. It did not matter if the sound was a little warped or off-key. You were in control. You had your own music machine. For many kids, this was their first experience playing music, and the pride that came with it was unmatched. You could stack your favorite discs. You could play the same one on repeat until it drove your parents up the wall. And the best part? No batteries. Just your hands, your ears, and your imagination. You did not need to understand how it worked. You just needed to hear that familiar click, feel the turn of the crank, and know that something sweet was about to happen. It was low-tech joy in a beige plastic box, and it never stopped playing in our heads. The screen flickered. You blew into the cartridge, and suddenly, magic. The Nintendo Entertainment System was not just a console, it was a resurrection. In the early 1980s, the video game industry had crashed hard. Too many bad games, too little trust. Then came Nintendo, sleek, gray, and unforgettable. It brought discipline back to design, quality back to gameplay, and joy back to living rooms. Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Duck Hunt. These were not just games, they were rituals. You did not play them, you lived them. The music stuck in your head, the secrets whispered on playgrounds, the hours you spent mastering pixel-perfect jumps. Nintendo created a language kids shared across the country, a shared dreamscape. It made nerds into heroes, siblings into teammates, and parents into confused spectators. And even today, the nostalgia runs deep. But it all started here, with a console that revived an industry and raised a generation. There was no internet, no patches, no downloads. Just you, the screen, and a controller with 2 buttons that somehow felt like a key to another world. When did play stop feeling like a portal? The flea market at the county fairgrounds was not just an event. It was an ecosystem. Hot pavement under your feet, the smell of popcorn mixing with motor oil, and a wall of voices haggling like they were at a medieval bazaar. Dad had a game plan. He always did. First, a lap to scout, then back around to make the real choices. You wandered behind him wide-eyed, marveling at tables full of license plates, rusted tools, vintage comic books, and a surprising amount of questionable homemade jerky. One guy sold nothing but bumper stickers with sayings that would get you sent to the principal's office. Another had rows of toy yo-yos. And even though Dad warned you, you begged for one anyway. It broke in 5 minutes, maybe 6, but you still carried it around like it was gold. There was always a booth with used records blaring classic rock through dusty speakers, and Dad would flip through the crates like he was searching for buried treasure. Every once in a while, he would hold one up and say, "Now this is music." You did not argue. Not when he looked that happy. And if you thought flea markets were a lawless land of loose change and sunburns, just wait until you hear about the go-kart track that somehow never got shut down. Shared bedrooms among siblings meant privacy was a myth and bedtime was an adventure. 2, sometimes 3 kids in one room, bunk beds, fold-out couches, mattresses on the floor. You learned to sleep through snoring, giggling, and whispered arguments over who stole the blanket. One lamp lit the room. One drawer held everyone's socks. If you wanted quiet, you closed your eyes and hoped for sleep. But there was love there too. Late-night stories, secret jokes, a flashlight under the covers. You made forts out of sheets and built walls with pillows, pretending they were rooms of your own. You learned to share without thinking, to wait your turn, to keep secrets. Sure, you fought. You drew invisible lines down the mattress. But you also looked out for each other, listened when someone cried, celebrated the nights when no one got in trouble. Those cramped quarters built closeness you never asked for, but maybe needed. And years later, you remembered those rooms not for the lack of space, but for the way they held you together. Shared bedrooms were loud, messy, and full of life. And even now, you sometimes miss what it meant to fall asleep beside someone who knew you by heart. In the 1970s, getting a TV signal felt like summoning the spirits. You did not just turn on the television and sit back, you had to work for it. That meant rabbit ears. That meant stretching, adjusting, and holding metal rods in every direction. And when the fuzz would not go away, there was only one solution: tinfoil. It crinkled, it sparkled, and somehow it worked. Wrapped like a desperate science experiment, your television antenna became a sculpture of hope and frustration. You might remember your sibling being the designated antenna holder, standing on one leg, arm raised, frozen in place while the rest of the family watched. It was trial and error, comedy, and chaos. The goal? A clear picture, even if it only lasted 5 minutes. There were always threats not to move, begging someone not to breathe too hard, cheering when the static cleared, booing when it came back. It was not just about the picture, it was about the ritual, the teamwork, the sacrifice. You learned patience, you learned creativity. You learned that a ball of tinfoil could mean the difference between watching your favorite show or sitting in silence. It was frustrating, ridiculous, and completely unforgettable. The boombox was not just loud, it was a statement. Carried on shoulders like a badge of pride, it turned sidewalks into dance floors and corners into concerts. You did not just listen to music, you shared it. The bigger the boombox, the bolder the sound, and the bolder the person holding it. In the 1980s, music finally broke free from bedrooms and car stereos. It went public. It went mobile. Hip-hop was rising, and the boombox was its battle cry. Beats spilled into city streets, block parties lit up entire neighborhoods, and break dancers spun on cardboard in the rhythm of rebellion. There was power in pressing play. It gave teenagers a voice, outsiders a spotlight, and artists an audience. But it was not all celebration. Noise complaints, curfews, police pushback. The boombox was controversial. Too loud, too urban, too new. Eventually, it faded into nostalgia as Walkmans took over, then CDs, then phones. Today, music lives in our ears, not on our shoulders. We stopped announcing what we loved to the world. But those who remember, remember. The sound, the swagger, the freedom. When did we decide our joy should be silent? By the power of Grayskull, you remember the rest. He-Man was not just a toy. He was a symbol of something bigger: fantasy, power, escape. In the 1980s, action figures did not just stand still. They had stories, real ones. The strip mall pet store did not smell like adventure. It smelled like wood shavings and fish food. But when Dad said, "Let's stop in for a minute," you knew it meant 20. The walls were lined with glass tanks full of turtles, frogs, and fish that looked too bright to be real. You would press your nose against the glass and point. "That one. I want that one." Dad would shake his head and smile. "We're not getting a turtle." 5 minutes later, you were holding a goldfish in a plastic bag, trying not to spill it on the seat of the car. He was not a pushover. He just knew the power of a memory. And that pet store, as humble as it was, felt like a mini zoo to you. There was always one sleepy lizard under a heat lamp and a parrot that squawked like a broken doorbell. Sometimes you would hear, "Hey there," from across the room and realize the bird was mocking you. Dad would strike up a conversation with the guy behind the counter like they were old war buddies, swapping advice on filters and food pellets. You would head home with a tank, a packet of food, and a new responsibility you were not quite ready for. And when you were ready for something outdoorsy, Dad knew just the place, with canoes and no life jackets in sight. Using public transportation exclusively meant your life moved on someone else's schedule. There was no jumping in the car for milk, no last-minute rides. You waited. At bus stops, on corners, in the rain, in the cold, in your Sunday best or your work shoes. The bus was never early. Sometimes it was late. But you waited. You held a pocket full of exact change. Maybe a transfer stub. You knew the routes like the back of your hand. You sat near the front if you were tired. In the back if you did not want to talk. You watched strangers argue, laugh, cry. You saw your city from a different view, block by block, stop by stop. Owning a car seemed like another world. Gas, insurance, repairs. Those were luxuries. The bus was what you had, and it was enough, sort of. It got you to school, to work, to church. You learned to carry groceries in bags that would not break. You made friends with the drivers. You memorized delays. And when the ride was over, you stepped off into whatever came next. Public transportation did not just move you. It taught you patience, resilience, and how to hold on when the brakes hit hard. They were young, they were messy, and they looked just like us. The Brat Pack were not heroes or superheroes. They were teenagers who felt everything too hard and said it out loud. When you watched The Breakfast Club, it was not a movie. It was a mirror. These kids, Molly Ringwald, Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, Anthony Michael Hall, they were your classmates, your crush, your quiet friend who wrote poems in the back of her notebook. They showed us that being misunderstood was not weakness. It was the most honest thing in the world. And America listened. These films made teenagers visible in a way no generation had done before. It was all there. The loneliness, the rebellion, the awkward crushes and silent pain. The Brat Pack did not just make films. They captured youth itself, wild and raw and unforgettable. They came, they burned, and then they vanished. The fame faded. The faces grew up. But the emotions, they still hit like a first heartbreak. In a world of curated youth and perfect filters, we forget what it felt like to be truly, painfully real. And maybe that is why those faces still haunt us in the best way. The Dented Can discount grocery store was the kind of place you never admitted shopping at, unless you were Dad. Then it was a badge of honor. You did not bring a list here, you brought instincts. Aisles of unlabeled tins, faded labels, and cardboard signs scribbled in permanent marker, 10 cans for $1. What cans? Who knew? Dad would hold one up and say, "Beef chunks and gravy." Sounds promising, like he was about to enter it in a cooking competition. Most of the time it was mystery meat roulette, but we were not there for the menu. We were there for the thrill. He treated the whole store like an auction. "Name brand beans. Get them while they last," he would whisper, like a man uncovering buried treasure. At checkout, he would proudly announce how much he saved. Never mind the fact that dinner might be spaghetti and something we would call tomato adjacent. You learned to laugh, to try everything once, and to realize a meal made on the cheap still meant you had one. But for a different kind of treasure, tucked away in someone's garage, let me tell you about the model train shop that made time stand still. If one of these fads brought back a spark, drop a comment, tap like, and subscribe to keep the memories coming.